Myfanwy, the Prince and the Poet. Myfanwy lived with her widowed mother in an old damp cottage a few miles from a small town. They were both poor. They lived on poverty porridge. Her mother always seemed to be ill, and she often stayed in bed all day. Myfanwy got used to looking after herself. She got up, got dressed, put a handful of oats in a pan with some water to make the day's porridge before she went to school. To get to school, she had to walk through the forest passing a deep, dark pool. Hardly anybody came that way. In fact, the people in the town thought that the forest was bewitched and that the pool held a spirit. It was said that many years ago, in fact centuries ago, when princes and poets rode the land, that a handsome prince had been tricked by the evil witch of the forest, who appeared to him as a beautiful young maiden. She led him to the pool and cast a spell on him, turning him into a large stone. She had meant to steal his casket of jewels before throwing him into the pool, but the casket and the stone went into the pool together and immediately sank to the bottom. The evil witch, like all evil beings, could not stand water on her skin, so all she could do was swear and put a curse on the spirit of the prince at the bottom of the pool. I have my revenge. You will be there for eternity. You can only be released if a young woman from this parish who reaches her 16th birthday still good and pure falls in love with you and dives into the pool to release you. She was quite certain that he would be there for eternity, as the town was a place of loose morals. If anyone tried and failed, they would be cursed for eternity too and remain at the bottom of the pool. Myfanwy knew the story of the prince, and she knew about the jewels and dreamed that one day when she was 16 she could release the prince. Maybe he would fall in love with her and she would become a princess. But as she was a plain girl, she thought he would at least reward her with some of his jewels for releasing him from the witch's curse. Then she and her mother could move out of their old damp cottage on the edge of the forest into one of the smart new houses in town. She had heard about the young women who had had the same dream as her and visited the pool on their 16th birthday, never to be seen again. Some of the townspeople thought that these young women had run off to the city with one of the lads who used to hang around on their motorbikes at weekends in the summer. The last two, whom the family knew, had both been good girls, but each had a fatal flaw in their character which they had overlooked. Pamela Price had once eaten a whole plate of jam tarts that her mother had set out to cool and blamed it on the dog next door, who got an undeserved scolding. Leonie Lloyd had overlooked all of the games of kiss chase she had enjoyed at primary school. Both had suffered the evil witch's curse, and neither of them were ever heard of again. Myfanwy had no friends at school. The other children avoided her. They laughed at her raggy clothes and said that she smelled. No one would ever be playing kiss chase with her. All she ate at home was poverty porridge. There would never be any jam to make jam tarts, so there was no danger of her stealing them. She concentrated on keeping herself good and pure so she could rescue the prince. This wasn't hard, as no one wanted to tempt her to do anything. So while her classmates got older and started smoking behind bike sheds, taking bottles of cider to the park and snogging down by the bins at the back of the co-op, Myfanwy walked around the forest and sat by the pool, thinking only pure thoughts of rescuing the cursed prince. On her 16th birthday, she sat by the pool after school and called out to the prince, and there was a reply, very faint. She strained to listen. Myfanwy, you can rescue me, but it must be at night. Come back at midnight. She didn't go to bed that night. Her mother was unwell again and sleeping soundly, so she was able to leave the house without having to say where she was going. She sat by the pool and heard the voice again. Myfanwy, you can rescue me, but not tonight. It must be a night with no moon. The moon is waning, but it is still bright in the sky. Come back on at midnight, on the night of no moon. She returned home. She worked out when the night of no moon would be and returned to the pool at midnight. It was so dark that she stumbled and fell several times, and she only knew she was at the pool because it was even darker than the surrounding forest. Myfanwy, you can rescue me. Your name means child of water. The water won't harm you. You must dive to the bottom of the pool and grab the big stone and set me free. Myfanwy was frightened. She had paddled in the clear, shallow water of the river that ran through the park, but she had never swum in the dark pool. Myfanwy, child of water, the voice became more insistent. Dive to the bottom and save me. She couldn't run away. She had been saving herself for this. Surely, as she was good and pure, no harm would come to her. She took off her thin dress and dived in. It was cold. Down, down she went, her lungs bursting. She could only do this once. She had to get it right first time. There was the stone with the last of her strength. She grabbed it and then felt strong hands clasping hold of her and pulling her to the surface. My prince. They reached the surface and the prince lay her down on the ground. In the darkness she could make out a large black horse and a large black hound. Thank you, my pretty. I am indeed the prince, but I am the prince of darkness. You have released me into the world and I am off to cause havoc. With his casket strapped to his back, he jumped onto the horse and rode off, followed by the hound. Myfanwy was too exhausted to do anything. If she had any strength, she would have cried out in her devastation, but she could only curl up into a ball in the undergrowth. Now a young poet had rented the other cottage in the forest. He came from the city and thought that some time in the country would give him inspiration for his great work. He decided to get up very early each morning and walk amongst the trees to the pool. He had heard the stories and thought that if anything would give him inspiration, this would be it. Well, imagine his surprise when he found a skinny young woman, bedraggled and shivering, lying by the pool. She was so small and slight that at first he thought it was a child, but as he got closer, he saw it was a grown woman. He was a kindly young man. He crouched down to talk to her, but she shied away. I won't harm you, he said, and took off his big cardigan to wrap around her. We need to get you warm, and he carried her to his cottage. In the cottage, Myfanwy was still frightened, not by this young man, but by what had happened that night. Sit by the fire, and I'll make you some hot chocolate and brandy, said the poet. The hot chocolate and brandy was the nicest thing that Myfanwy had ever tasted, not surprising as she had lived on poverty porridge all her life. Soon she felt warmer and less afraid, and she told the whole story to the poet. He wrote the story down. Myfanwy and the poet fell in love and lived relatively happily ever after. The poet made her story into an epic ballad which was published and made a fair amount of money for a poet. Having kept herself so good and pure for the prince, she realised that there were some things that she'd missed out on in life. One of these was hot chocolate and brandy. She developed quite a taste for it, and for other things too. And Myfanwy's poor widowed mother? Once Myfanwy had warmed up and put on some clothes belonging to the poet, the two of them went to the mother's cottage. Her mother hadn't missed her. She had passed out and was lying on the sofa. The poet, whose life in the city had made him streetwise, immediately recognised what was making the woman so ill and lethargic. She was a heroin addict. No wonder there hadn't been any spare money for jam tarts when Myfanwy was growing up. It had all gone to the local drug dealer. The mother went into rehab, and when she came out and had recovered, she moved into a smart new council house on the estate in town. But what happened to the Prince of Darkness? Well, that's another story.